Hey everybody, it's Brooks here, Senior Pastor, First Baptist Church of the Islands. Thank you for joining me for today's 5 for 5. So this is the week of Easter, and all week long, each of our pastors are going to be aiming our 5 for 5 video devotionals towards an element of the Easter story. Again, all of the story is true. You can read of it in the Gospels. I hope you'll do that sometime this week. Just pick a Gospel. They all talk about the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, if you would like, you could read all 4 gospel accounts towards the end, typically, of each of those gospels. John has some of that in the begin or in the middle, but typically towards the end of each gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you can pick up and read the true accounts from their perspective of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. So that's going to be our focus through this week's 5 for 5 devotionals. Really hope you'll join with us on this weekend for Easter services, 6 o'clock on Saturday night, also on Sunday, 9 o'clock and 10:30, our regular times. So today I want to talk with you about one element of the kind of that last portion of Jesus's earthly life leading up to the crucifixion, and that is his time with the disciples, called the Last Supper. You know, a famous painting, obviously, that kind of captures that of what, some would maybe think it could look like, but really the Gospels are where that event is described. And the basic scene is that Jesus is celebrating Passover with his disciples. And as he celebrates Passover, he does something really interesting, because he begins then to kind of recast what Passover was going to be all about. And he gives it somewhat of a new meaning, in a sense. Listen what it says in Matthew chapter 26. It says in verse 17, "On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?'" Well, they would begin to celebrate that meal with strong ties to the Old Testament. Passover would have come in the book of Exodus, when God would spare the Israelites, essentially bringing, in a sense, salvation, I guess you could kind of say, at least from salvation from a very dire circumstance. And it would be on the heels of Passover that the people of Israel would cross the Red Sea and ultimately enter into the Promised Land. And so this was a big event for them. Well, Jesus and his disciples were celebrating Passover as any good Jew would have done. They're celebrating that in the moment leading up to the cross. Well, it's interesting, because in the midst of that, as Jesus talks about his departure, as he talks, or as he paints an example of them of what servanthood looks like, he washes the disciples' feet. He talks about the Holy Spirit who would come. A lot happens in that upper room during the Last Supper. There was a moment where Jesus would recast that moment, and he would redefine the Last Supper. He would redefine, so to speak, even Passover, where he would refer to himself as the bread. He would even show them bread and say, "This is my body, which is for you." And he would hold the cup and say, "This is my blood, which is for you." And it's as though Jesus would cast himself as the central figure of the whole entire story. No longer would it be Passover so much that's celebrated, but the Lord's Supper, representing his body that was given, his blood that would be shed. And in just a matter of hours, that's exactly what would happen when Jesus would give his life on the cross, his body, his blood for us. That had to be an intimate moment there in that upper room with the disciples. They could not have grasped what Jesus was saying, that he himself was the fulfillment, essentially, of the whole entire Bible. Right? He was the way to the Father. He was the way of salvation. And you know what? He still is today. And you can have moments just like that with him as you celebrate him as your Passover, as your way of salvation. Many of you have given your life to Jesus already, and you know that he gave his body and shed his blood for you, and you can celebrate that this week and every day. Others of you, maybe you've never made that decision, and the whole reason he came and gave his life was so that you could ultimately have a relationship with God through him. When you trust him and his sacrifice on the cross, yielding your life to Jesus, trusting him, inviting him to forgive and take over, and he'll do it. This Easter week is a great time to remember what he did for us. He gave his body, he shed his blood, and it's for that and for who he is that we worship him. I hope you'll do that this week and every day. God bless you.